You're listening to Democracy Now!, Pacifica Radio's daily grassroots election show. I'm Amy Goodman. Today in Washington, Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will participate in a Middle East summit sponsored by President Clinton. The current crisis in Israel began 1 week ago when the Netanyahu government opened a tourist tunnel near one of the holiest sites in the Islamic world. The move ignited a wave of Palestinian protests reminiscent of the Intifada. By the week's end, 52 Palestinians and 14 Israelis were killed in the worst violence since Israel and the PLO signed their peace deal in 1993 at a Rose Garden ceremony here in Washington. Yesterday, White House spokesperson Mike McCurry was asked about the president's goals for the summit.
In persuading all of these people to come here, did we offer any assurances to any side that we would push for specific results to any of the specific issues dividing?
We attached no preconditions to the discussions, but we asked only that the leaders arrive in a frame of mind to address the fundamental questions that will be before them over the next 2 days. How can we restore calm? What can we do to bring an end to the violence? How can we re-engage so that the process is advanced rather than slipping away into turns to reversing course?
Mike, has the U.S. found in consultations with other allies outside of the Middle East a continuation of the sort of anger at Israel that was being expressed sometimes last week about sort of precipitating this whole thing? And what, if anything, has the U.S. or can the U.S. do to allay?
Well, we've expressed our view that the antidote to frustrations and exasperation are the type of dialogue, or is the type of dialogue that the President will help sponsor over the next 2 days. We're aware of the views of other governments. Those were reflected in the decision taken by the United Nations Security Council on Saturday. You're aware of our position on that question. We believe that the best thing that we can do and the best thing the international community can do at this point is to encourage the parties to directly address their grievances, their issues, their disputes, and to continue to make progress implementing the agreements they've already reached.
Mike McCurry speaking yesterday. He's the White House press spokesperson. U.S. policy towards the Middle East. That's what we're going to be debating today. I'm joined by my co-host Juan Gonzalez. He's a columnist with the New York Daily News. Our guests are Daniel Pipes of the Middle East Forum and Middle East Quarterly based in Philadelphia. We're also joined in New York by Norman Finkelstein. He's author of Image and Reality of the Israel-Palestine Conflict. His forthcoming book is called The Rise and Fall of Palestine. Well, why don't we begin with Daniel Pipes? Can you tell us what you think of the Middle East summit called today and what you think President Clinton should get out of it?
Well, I'm afraid that President Clinton has a tendency to pop off when it comes to the Middle East and do things too quickly. He went on a trip to Damascus 2 years ago with a week's notice, and it failed. And then he arranged on a week's notice a great big meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh in March to condemn terrorism, and it had no consequence. And I fear that this 2 or 3 day lead time for a meeting of heads of state isn't going to work this time either, and it's going to be a lot of show and no results.
What do you think the U.S. should get out of it?
Well, the goal certainly is to resurrect the peace process. The peace process, in my view, came to an end last Wednesday afternoon when the Palestinian police started shooting. I mean, there were a lot of disagreements to that point, be it on openings of tourist sites or Arafat's rhetoric or the withdrawal from Hebron. There are many, many issues between the two sides, but until that point they hadn't used force. And when the Palestinian police opened fire, that changed the whole, it ended the negotiating process, changed the whole political relationship, and that needs to be resurrected now.
Norman Finkelstein, would you agree that the process broke down when the firing started by the Palestinians?
Well, I think the first point is to clarify is what is the so-called peace process. Essentially, the peace process is about Israel's attempt to pursue the Bantustanization of the West Bank and Gaza. That was the intent of the Oslo Accord, and up until recently, the Palestinians were acquiescing in their Bantustanization. Last Wednesday, the Palestinians, for the first time, engaged in resistance to that Bantustanization, and the Israelis then, according to reports, opened fire and Palestinian police against the spirit of the Oslo II Accord, joined with the Palestinians in reacting to the Israeli firing. So I think it's correct to say that the so-called peace process is breaking down, but one ought to have clarity about what that peace process is about. One also ought to be clear about what constitutes a violation of the so-called peace process. A violation consists when Palestinians fire on Israelis. Notice that in all the commentary thus far in the media on the events of the last few days, it's been focused exclusively on Palestinians firing on Israelis. When Israelis fire on Palestinians, that's in keeping, that conforms to the peace process. Palestinians aren't supposed to fire on Israelis. Palestinians are supposed to fire on Palestinians. If Palestinian police torture and kill Palestinians, that conforms to the peace process. If Israelis kill Palestinians, that conforms to the peace process. If Palestinians resist their Bantustanization, that's a breakdown of the peace process.
Richard Pipes, what do you think? Daniel Pipes, sorry. What do you think of that assessment of the peace process?
Well, it's very hard to discuss the peace process in these terms, the so-called peace process, Bantustanization. These are all very strange terms that are, I don't quite know how to respond to them. There is a peace process in the sense that the Israelis and the Palestinians have agreed on a set of accords which basically say to the Israelis, you'll get security, you won't get attacked, and basically say to the Palestinians, you'll get autonomy and you'll get economic benefit from it. It doesn't promise everything to either side, but it is a reluctant compromise they reached 3 years ago. I think universally people of goodwill believe this is something that is desirable in itself. Mr. Finkelstein apparently condemns it and sees it as Israeli hegemony over Palestinians. Well, to be sure, the Palestinians aren't getting sovereignty out of this, or it's certainly not assured. But on the other hand, it is something which most Americans, in fact, overwhelming majority of Americans, see as something good in itself.
But what do you think of that idea that he put forward?
If I may respond to that, I won't speak for most Americans since I haven't taken a poll on what most Americans think about the topic. But I'm surprised that Daniel Pipes is so well informed on the topic, is not used to language like Bantustanization. For example, I'm sure Daniel Pipes has read Meron Ben-Veniste, the former deputy mayor of Jerusalem, his recent book, Intimate Enemies. In that book, Meron Ben-Veniste, who's also the most authoritative Israeli scholar on the West Bank and Gaza, he refers explicitly to the Bantustanization of the West Bank and Gaza as the main consequence of the Oslo Accord.
So what are you doing?
So that language is not so odd. Now let me make one other point.
Are you against it?
Daniel Pipes referred to the Palestinians being granted autonomy within their enclaves in the West Bank. That's exactly correct. What is a Bantustan, Daniel Pipes? As I understand it, that South Africans...
What are we talking about South Africa? Are you against this peace process, Mr. Finkelstein?
I'm not for or against the peace process. I'm here to clarify exactly what constitutes the peace process and then let the American people decide for themselves whether they're for or against the Bantustanization of Palestinians.
For or against it is the key
exactly
point.
as whether they were for or against the Bantustanization of South African blacks.
Let's just talk about the peace process.
Let them decide. Why should you?
Are you hoping that the meetings today and tomorrow are going to lead to the successful resumption of the process that was underway?
I think the purpose of this discussion is to clarify exactly what's at stake.
Could you answer my question?
You referred, Daniel Pipes, to the Palestinians being granted no more than autonomy. The question I asked you, Daniel Pipes, is why are they only entitled to autonomy, whereas Israelis are entitled to sovereignty?
Okay, I'll answer that
question,
and then you answer my question. I think the Palestinians are only entitled to autonomy because they are...
subhuman.
Please, don't put words in my mouth. Because it is they have law... Basically, to put it most simply, in World War I, they joined the losing side.
Oh,
in World War II, they joined the Nazis who lost the war. In the
World
Cold
War I, the Nazis?
Could I please answer?
Norman, why don't you let Daniel Pipes respond?
Okay.
In the Cold War, they joined the Soviets and lost. In the war between Iraq and the Allies, they joined Iraq and they lost. They lost, they lost, they lost. Every time they lost. You know what happens to losers? They often don't get the results they seek.